He thought that he was very, very troubled by what happened, and he thought that Nancy Pelosi was actually just doing her job in terms of investigating these, what he said are very troubling allegations.
Thanks for all that perspective, Catalina. Well, Mark Sanford's case for the Republican presidential nomination has benefited to some degree by the Democrats' impeachment inquiry, which Adam Schiff has said he'll continue through the next 2 weeks' congressional recess. The effect of all of this on President Trump's Twitter feed has been dramatic. 11 tweets this morning alone, and they portray a livid, defiant, and caps-locked president. For instance, this first tweet, we can see it right here. It was a perfect conversation with Ukraine president. Democratic critics, of course, point out that if it was perfect, there was no need for the White House to violate protocol by putting it in a code word state secret vault system. Also, the quotation marks tend to suggest he's quoting himself right there in real time on Twitter. And we can look at the next tweet here. If that perfect phone call with the president of Ukraine isn't considered appropriate, then no future president can ever again speak to another foreign leader. Now, critics to this say the White House's own releases of the whistleblower's report, the substance of the rough transcript, and the attempt to cover up the verbatim transcript suggest that Trump didn't think the call was appropriate when it in fact happened. Move on to the next tweet from this morning. Sounding more and more like the so-called whistleblower isn't a whistleblower at all. In addition, all secondhand information that proved to be so inaccurate that there may not have even been somebody else, a leaker or spy, feeding it to him or her, a partisan operative. Here, Trump is echoing something he suggested yesterday, that the whistleblower and/or his sources should be considered spies. And you may remember from yesterday's audio, which we played, where he suggested something quite ominous about how a person fitting that description would be treated in the, quote, old days. And on to the next tweet. The Democrats are now to be known as the Do-Nothing Party. Of course, Democrats contend that they are doing at least one thing, and that is proceeding with impeachment inquiry. And one more tweet here, which we have for you. To show you how dishonest the lamestream media is, I use the word little, and you can see the apostrophe there, not little, without the apostrophe, in describing corrupt Congressman Little Adam Schiff. Low ratings CNN purposely took out the hyphen out and said, I spelled the word little wrong, a small but never-ending situation with CNN. Trump versus CNN forever, it seems, though this one's most interesting for setting off a viral punctuation moment, which you don't see every day, with this hyphen apostrophe confusion. And it just so happens that if you look here, never-ending would have been a perfect opportunity for a hyphen. As you can see by President Trump's tweets, even the prospect of constitutionally removing our commander-in-chief is no trivial affair, and maybe you've been wondering how the process actually works. If so, you are not alone. Our Rick Adams entered virtual reality to divine the absolute truth.
President Trump could join a club even more exclusive than Mar-a-Lago, the House of Impeachment, where he could end up sharing a cocktail with Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. Richard Nixon almost joined them too, but he got in a helicopter and went somewhere else before they got him. In this Virtually Rick, we answer a rather important question. Impeachment, what the heck is that? So, come with me. Let's get virtual. And you may be familiar with a rather important piece of paper called the Constitution. It allows Congress to sack a standing, or in this case, sitting president, if enough Congress people vote that the Pres committed this: treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, which basically means a high-level abuse of power violating, say, the public trust. They don't have to be big crimes, just enough that most lawmakers agree is wrong for a president to do. But whatever they decide, they also have to have one eyeball on the future, because it will set the precedent for the next president, if you know what I mean. And it all starts here at the nation's Capitol building, and inside with the House of Representatives. Let's take a look at what they're going to have to look at. Basically, they're going to set up an inquiry and investigate, or they can even just vote on what the president is charged with, aka the articles of impeachment. And they only have to get a majority vote on one of the articles or charges, which then means that the president is impeached. Game over, right? Wrong. Basically, it's just a bunch of your peers saying, whoops, you've been a bit naughty and we're going to tell the grown-ups now. And the grown-ups in this case are the US Senate. And this is where it all gets a bit serious, as they then hold a trial and everyone votes as to whether they believe the president should be convicted. If 2/3 of the senators vote that way, then the president could hear his own catchphrase shouted back at him, and he'd be removed from office. But that's presuming that the Republicans let it get that far. They control the Senate, and they could decide in a vote to dismiss the trial without even hearing a single word of evidence. Either way, in this case, it's a high-wire act for the Democrats. If they can't convict, they could galvanize the president's supporters and give him a boost for his run for office in 2020. Remember, no president has ever been removed from office through impeachment. But each impeachment has left the political process scarred and the country even more divided. But in the end, it will be registered voters who decide whether it was all worth it when they let their elected leaders know what they think of them at the ballot box in 2020.
Straight out of virtual reality, and right here is Rick
Sir.
Adams. Thanks so much for coming. Rick, I love your take on our zany constitutional crisis that we're experiencing here, but I'm going to drape myself in an American flag right now and just say
Beautiful.
Things are relatively bizarre right now on the other side of the ocean. In fact, where you come from.
What are you talking about?
We've all heard a little bit about another executive there, Boris Johnson, who is also being in some ways thwarted and possibly removed from office. It's interesting moments that we have here, right? Back and forth.
Very much. It's very interesting. And I think there's a mechanism to remove a government from executive power over there. And strangely, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, who's effectively the leader of what's also the kind of Republican Party, basically, in the UK, is saying to the opposition, he's saying, hey, remove me, return a vote of no confidence. Why is he doing that?
Right.
Well, some might say a cynical move in order to fight a general election on the terms of I'm going to take the UK out of Europe in Brexit and therefore power these powerful forces behind him to put him back into power.
It's very interesting because what you're talking about is something that we're seeing here too, possibly with President Trump. The Republican play seems to be, let's release these documents, let's get impeachment in the air so we can galvanize our base. That's sort of like what you're talking about is happening there too.
Definitely.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
And when you think about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump as these two leaders, I mean, they bear this physical semblance, and there are some ways in which they speak to similar bases, right? A conservative base and maybe a populist base, Brexit.
Same haircuts.
Well, there is that. So, I mean, do you also feel, do you see these resemblances, and in which ways do you think that they're different from each other?
I think so. I think they're very similar, and also when you think about it, they've both been advised by the same man, Steve Bannon, who has been responsible for all kinds of mischief, as well as Dominic Cummings, who's helped Boris formulate his plan. And I think they are very similar because they both realise that there's no point in apologising. It's just be direct, speak to your base, and hopefully they'll return you to power.
A lot of what you're saying right now, I think we're going to see play out, at least on this side of the ocean, with impeachment. I feel like I understand a little something more thanks to your virtual reality explainer. Thank you so
welcome.
much.
I'll wear the flag around me next time,
well,
too.
flag and flag next time.
Very good.
All right, Bianca. Take
Okay,
that
does
control.
everybody in here love gelato? Yes? Is that like, yes?
Yes.
Agreed upon? Okay, the
Yes.
world's top gelato chefs, thank you for agreeing with me,